Good evening, everyone. Tonight's shiur is a very interesting shiur, I must say. As I was learning it, I was very inspired to study the particulars of which we will discuss in a minute. It's called Bringing Down a Bit of Heaven to Earth. It's an interesting thing. Can we indeed bring down a little bit of heaven to earth? Is there not a verse in Tehillim that says, "Hashamayim shamayim la Hashem, v'ha'aretz natan livnei Adam"? The heavens are for God. And the land, the earth, God gave to man to do what we need to do in this world. Of course, the explanation of that is that we shouldn't ponder the mysteries of heaven. We need to get on with what we need to get on, do what we need to get on, and that what happens in heaven and all of the reasons and all of the plans and the divine plans, it's not for us to know, it's for heavens to know. We need to know what God told us clearly, and God told us clearly in the Torah. And that is a covenant that He's made with us and a covenant that we made with Him. However, there is a concept of bringing spirituality down to earth, and that is a very important concept. Last week we read in the Torah, Vayetze Yaakov mi Be'er Shava vayelech Harana. Yaakov left Be'er Shava, where he was living, the land of Israel, with his parents, and he went towards Haran, to the house of Lavan, to establish himself, to marry, to establish a family, the 12 tribes of Israel. This verse is a very important verse for us, for many reasons. And the reason is because herein we find the prototype or the symbol of the soul leaving its abode, descending into this material world and engaging, similar to Yaakov, establishing our lives, the purpose and why we exist. So to Yaakov, all of a sudden, for decades he lives under the influence of his father and his grandfather, Abraham and Yitzhak. He studies under them. He's a man that lives a spiritual life, a holy and godly life. And all of a sudden he's forced to leave that spiritual comfort and protection and go to a place called Haran. And the reason why the sages say it's called Haran is because it is borrowed from the word Haron Af, a place, so to speak, that is antithesis to spirituality, a place, so to speak, that arouses God's wrath or God's anger, so to speak. In other words, a place of spiritual desolation and disappointment. And you can well imagine that Yaakov Avinu, who lives in a very spiritually protected place, who's climbing spiritually consistently, all of a sudden is thrust to a place of Haran, where on the one hand, he has to earn a living, has to marry and bring children to the world, and that has its challenges at the best of times, where one, so to speak, is thrust into the materialism of the world, even though that's the divine will, but it is, in a way, a step down. As the sages say, Nehot darga unesiv itata. Go down a level and marry. Meaning to say that till now, those who were engaged in spirituality and studying their whole lives now have to depart from that and, in a way, descend. Now, descending is not a bad thing per se, but ultimately it is a descent. I mean, the soul does descend to this world, and it's called a descent. But this descent is for the purpose of an ascent, of a greater purpose, of a greater achievement. But it is a descent. Married life to a person who's closeted in spirituality and closeted in the confines of halakha and study of Torah is a descent. There's no doubt about that. You're now engaging in the materialism of the world, have to earn a living, etc., etc. So it's a descent. But the purposes of this descent is for an ascent to achieve the purpose of our existence, etc. But it is a descent. If that's not enough, he has to go to the place of the treacherous Lavan, and a place that is antithesis, a city that is antithesis to spirituality, and to a person who's a treacherous liar, a very cunning liar, a place of Lavan, where he has to live under his roof and under his influence and still maintain his innocence and his spirituality. As he tells later on, when he does leave 20 years later, he sends a message to Esav, Im Lavan garti vayehad ata. I have tarried till now to come back to the land of Israel, and I lived with Lavan. Now garti, the word garti means live, but it also contains the word ger, which means stranger. I always viewed myself as a stranger. My success in the house of Lavan is that I did not intermingle and interact and assimilate the concepts and the lifestyle and the policies and philosophies of Lavan. It's strange to me. It was always strange to me from day one to 20 years later. That is one interpretation. The other interpretation, the word garti, is the same letters as taryag, or the exact numerical value of 613, which means to say that he continually maintained a spiritual life, and he's sending a message to Esav that if I was able to maintain my innocence and spirituality there, then I'm surely able to do so with you as well, and not be influenced by you, and I have not diminished my merits in being deserving of the blessings which I received 20 years ago from our father Yitzhak. But nonetheless, a difficult scenario to be, to such a degree that Yaakov knew that he was, so to speak, stepping in the lion's den, that he decides not to travel to Lavan straight away. In fact, he delays his trip for 14 years. He travels to the academy, to the house of study of his great-great-great-grandfather, Eved. And he studies under his feet for 14 years as a preparation, for he understood that one needs to prepare oneself, one needs to prepare oneself before one engages in battle. One has to train, one has to get the right equipment, one has to know how to use the equipments. So to spiritually, when one engages in a spiritual battle, or when one enters a more physical plane or domain, one has to prepare oneself. That is the reason why so many young students, and we encourage them to do so, to go and study Torah in yeshivot, in academies. Not necessarily everyone's going to be a rabbi. It's to prepare them for a spiritual life. To prepare them when they do get engaged in the physical world, they have the tools by which, and the strength by which to engage the physical and material life and not get lost. We think we let kids, let them decide which path they want to go. But if they can't decide which path they want to go, if you don't give them the tools to be able to overcome the challenges of life, it's almost like they're doomed for God forbid, for difficulties in the realm of spirituality and spiritual achievements. Whereas you give them the tools, they stand a chance. So we send children to yeshivot and girls to seminaries, not to become rabbis and rebbetzins. We send them to be good Jews, to be able to be knowledgeable Jews, to be able to then withstand the challenges of Haran, of the physical material world. And that's exactly what Yaakov did. Yaakov was a working man. He didn't become a practicing rabbi. He was a working man. Nonetheless, despite that, he went to study for 14 years as a preparation. For he understood that his goal is mammoth. And that goal is establishing the nation of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. To do so, one does not take this lightly. Especially when it has to occur in the house of Lavan, in a foreign land, foreign ideologies. So this verse really is a prototype for the descent of the soul in this world and the exile, the existence of the Jew in exile. How does one relate to it? This verse. Especially since we know that Yaakov had a dream, and in this dream he dreamt of a ladder. Behold, there's a ladder, and the ladder is set down below, down this material physical earth. But there is a possibility for us to climb up to the heavens. He saw this in this dream, despite the fact that where is he going now? He's not going back home. He just left the academy of Ever. So he left all of the spiritual academies and under the influence of his father. Now he's going to Haran. Now he's actually journeying to Haran. Now he's journeying to get married, to work, to establish his life. And there he dreams about this ladder. And the sages teach us that this ladder had 4 rungs. And for those who participate in the shiur on tefillah, on prayer, know that 4 rungs refers to the 4 worlds or the 4 rungs of prayer. But the sages also tell us that this refers to the 4 exiles that the Jewish people experienced, including Egypt, etc. Babylon, Edom, which is Rome, which is the exile that we currently find ourselves, and Madai, that of Purim, the exile where the Jewish people were threatened in Purim. So there are 4 exiles. So he dreamt about that 4 exile, and nonetheless, despite these exiles, the Jew can climb up and reach the heavens. So that's an important dream for us. These verses are very important for us because it's a prototype for the Jew, the mentality for the Jew to exist and thrive in exile, achieve what they need to achieve in exile, and generally speaking, the soul's descent into this material world. Can you imagine a soul whose pure spirituality descends into a body where it's material, wants to eat, wants to sleep, wants to drink, wants to go this and do that? And not only that, it's coupled with an animalistic soul or a negative inclination that is cheeky and naughty at best, wicked and evil at worst, and everything in between. So this is an important verse for us. Before we leap into this verse that has great symbolism and teaching, we have to ask an important question. And that is, we have no indication in the Bible, in the Torah, that God revealed himself to Yaakov until that moment in time. This, as far as we know, as far as the Torah tells us, and at least even if there was some sort of revelation or prophecy, not significant enough, or not powerful enough, or not as great as this, by which God reveals himself to him. This is the first time. Which means that all of those years that Yaakov studied under the influence of his father and lived a spiritual life, and even in the 14 years where he went and he expanded his knowledge and his spiritual pursuits, never had a godly revelation. Wow. And all of a sudden, right at that point, when he's about to travel to Haran, to the house of Lavan, all of a sudden, where he now is going to live a more materialistic existence, all of a sudden revelation. Why? No revelation before. Where would you think the greater revelation would be? If you were to have prophecy, and you are waiting for prophecy and preparing yourself for prophecy, where would you expect the prophecy to be? Perhaps in a synagogue, where you're sitting and you're learning and preparing, you're going to the mikvah, you're studying Kabbalah, you're studying Zohar, you're reading Tehillim all day, you're giving charity, and you're in a protected spiritual environment. That's what you'd expect it to be, correct? You don't expect it to be in the middle of Kohl's shopping center, picking bananas and vegetables for the kids for tonight's dinner. You wouldn't expect it there. And all of a sudden, in the middle of you fell asleep because you were so tired. You were pushing the trolley and there was a chair there and you just sat there and you fell asleep and God came and appeared to you in the middle of Kohl's Bondi Junction. Wow. That's nifty. Never happened to me, by the way. And that's similar what happens to Yaakov. Similar to what happens to him. Why there? Let us now thrust into this symbolism of the very first word of that verse. The pasuk says, "Vayetze Yaakov," and Yaakov left. He left the house of his father, of Beersheba, of the spiritual place, to go to Haran, with all of what Haran represents and all of the negativity and materialism that it represents, right? The word Vayetze, there's a great Kabbalist by the name of Rabbi Natan Nata Shapiro. He was born in the late 1500s and died in the early 1600s. He was one of the great rabbis of Krakow, the city of Krakow. I visited his grave. He's buried in the ancient cemetery, in the old cemetery of Krakow. And he is one of the perhaps only graves, at least the ones that I know of, that it says, Hu ha'ish asher amru alav, he is the man by which it is said upon him, shediber ito Eliyahu hanavi panim el panim, of which Elijah the prophet spoke to him face to face. It says this on his tombstone. I have a picture of it. I saw it with my own eyes. But it's known. He was one of the great Kabbalists of his era. He was one of those that introduced the Luraic Kabbalistic school of thought to Poland. And he was a great Kabbalist. And he wrote a very deep work called Megale Amukot, the revealer of the hidden, the deepest depths. And there he says something very cryptic about this week's parasha, this word in fact. Vayetze, he says, these 4 letters stand for something. So there's 4 letters here. Vav, Vayetze is spelled Vav, Yud, Tzadik, Alef, Vayetze. Vayetze stands for Vayar Yaakov Tzurat Alef. Yaakov saw, in other words, as he left, or when he's leaving towards Haran, traveling towards Haran, he saw the letter Aleph, the shape of the letter Aleph. That's what he saw. And that's what he says, very cryptic. What does he mean by that? And I saw in a book called Shvile Pinchas, he explains what this means, and I'll elaborate a little bit if I may. What does this mean that he saw the letter Aleph? Now we know the letter Aleph is a very powerful letter, as we will soon analyze and see. We know that Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's also a very deep letter, as we will soon see. And it represents a lot of things, but it's also the first letter of the 10 Commandments. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God. So the letter Aleph has a lot of symbolisms, as we will soon see. But before we get to that, let us analyze 2 things. Heaven and earth. What is heaven called? Shamayim. And God called the heavens Shamayim. Vayikra Elokim larakia Shamayim. And God called the heavens Shamayim. Rashi says, why did he call it Shamayim? Because heaven is a place of absolute harmony and unity. The truth is, spirituality, the greater the spirituality, the more harmony and unity there is, the more nullification of self. There's no sense of self, only the recognition of spirituality, and thus, up there in heaven, there is no opposites. There is no confusion. And Rashi says, why is it called Shamayim? Because it is a composite of 2 concepts, Esh and Mayim, fire and water. What's fire and water? Fire and water, we know, the Kabbalists teach us, is a symbol of, water is a symbol of divine kindness and revelation. And Esh, fire, is a symbol of concealment and divine judgment. When we say divine judgment, we've explained before, divine judgment means to say that God contracts and conceals himself in order for there to be free choice. So on the one hand, to create the world and to relate to the world, there has to be an element of revelation. But yet on the other hand, there has to be a level of concealment. Like, for example, and we mentioned this example many a time, if I'm to teach you something or to express to you my emotions, am I concealing more than what I'm revealing? I'm concealing more than what I'm revealing, because I can't reveal to you, especially in the pace that I talk, the quickness of my thought and the depth of my thought. Takes me a long time and a lot of words to explain to you a depth of a thought that is very quick. Similarly, if I'm overcome with emotion, I find it very hard to express myself, almost to the extent that if I begin to talk, if I'm engulfed and overwhelmed with emotion of either anguish, God forbid, or immense happiness, I'm so emotional that I move to tears. I can barely express it. And when I do, it's just with fragmented words. So it's a concealment, but it's a revelation. It's a revelation because it reveals at least something. I'm telling you at least something what I'm thinking. I'm telling you something, at least what I'm feeling, but it's a concealment. And that is a mechanism of interacting with others. So to speak, if we're to borrow that concept and apply it to God, for there to be an interaction with this world, there has to be, on the one hand, revelation, or a certain degree of revelation, but yet on the other hand, concealment, because there has to be the concealment, otherwise it'd be so flooded with revelation that the purpose of creation and the ability to have free choice and to earn our way and our keep spiritually would not be facilitated, as we've explained on numerous and many occasions. So that is Esh and that is Mayim. That is the symbolism. On a more simple and practical level, in this world we know that we see the divine judgment, where people in the world are judged. And we also see divine grace and divine kindness. Not always do we understand them. Not always are we able to harmonize them, synthesize them, and relate to them in a manner by which there is equilibrium and harmony in our lives. Quite often there is confusion. Why is this happening? There is a lot of doubt. I don't know. Is this the path that God wants me to go? Doesn't want me to go? Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to my friend? Why is this happening to the family? Etc., etc. There's confusion and doubt because there's concealment, and there must be concealment. For there cannot be a world, and we cannot function without concealment. So this is this world. But in heaven there is no concealment as such. There is no confusion. The same God that created darkness is the same God that created light. And on those levels both are appreciated. And as we discussed last week, the concept of the perception of the higher worlds or the angels or the existences of spiritual concepts or entities, they perceive and understand, therefore there's no discrepancies. There's only harmony, there's no confusion, there's no doubt. In heaven, that's why Shamayim, Esh, Umayim, where there's a harmony between fire and water. If you have a fire and you pour in water, what's going to happen? It's going to extinguish. Or vice versa, you put fire underneath water, the fire, big enough, will consume, will dry out the water, so to speak, will cause it to go up in steam and disappear. It's opposites. They don't work together. In heavens they do. That's heaven. In this world, there is confusion, there is doubt. That harmony doesn't exist. It exists in heaven. That's why it's called Shamayim, Eshumayim. If that's the case, we have a very simple question. What's the question? Why isn't heaven called Eshmayim? Why is it called Shamayim? What happened to the Alef? Where did the Alef go? It should be called Shamayim. It's a symbol of fire and water. And all of a sudden, Alef disappears. Where did the Alef go? Now we have another question. What's earth called? What's land? What's this world called? Eretz. Very good. Eretz. Why is it called Eretz? Because it shares the root of Ratzon or Ratzah or Ratz. Ratz means a desire, a running, a longing to do something, to do what you desire, to fulfill what you desire. Eretz asher ratzeta, the Midrash tells us the Eretz, this world is called Eretz because Eretz asher ratzeta la'asot retzon kona. It runs, it desires to do the will of God. Well, that's a beautiful name if you think about it. A land that runs and desires to do the will of God. It almost seems that the land really is more fulfills the will of God in a way than heavens. No? The truth is that's correct. What's the bottom line? The bottom line is here, this world, correct? What's the bottom line when you build a house? The bricks, the mortar, there's what's called, and I've explained this already also before, there is external will and internal will. What's an external will? An external will is the plans, the bricks, the mortar to build a house. And even the house, to a certain degree, is an external will. I don't want a house, I want a home. I want a home by which I live in, which is comfortable. I can bring up my family, protect them, etc. Where did God, so to speak, cause His divine presence to be revealed? Where did God give the Torah? Where did the buck stop? In this world. So, indeed, this world is a world that really is the fruition of the divine will. So it's correct when the Midrash says it's the land that fulfills the divine will. If that is the case, why does not the world called Ratz or Retz? Because we said Eretz Asher Ratzetar, Ratz, it ran with enthusiasm to fulfill the Ratzon, the will of God. So the root of that is Retz or Ratz. Why do we call it Eretz? There's an extra Alef there, isn't there? Now we begin to understand. Now we're beginning to understand. So before I elaborate upon this, I want to just mention the following. An interesting prayer which we say numerous times during our prayers. We say it in the end of every Amidah, and we say it in the end of some Kadeshim, some Kaddish. And that is, Oseh Shalom Bimromav. He, the Almighty God, who makes peace. What's peace? Harmony, clarity. Bimromav, in heaven, in His abode, in heaven. Because we mentioned before that there is clarity and harmony in heaven. Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu. May He make peace upon us down below in earth. Because here there's not much clarity. There's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of doubt. There's a concealment of godliness. How many times people ask themselves, is God really listening to my prayers? Is God answering my prayers? We sometimes lack the confidence in our prayers. We should never do that because our prayers are always heard. How the Almighty decides to answer, He decides to answer in His divine wisdom. And we have to have the faith in that, but certainly the Almighty hears our prayers and cares for us. We just have to express it, not with doubt. You know, if you were to come to a job interview, for example, and you were to doubt yourself and not speak with confidence and sincerity, can you do this? Yeah, look, I think I can. What about this? Are you good with that? Yeah, I can type. I'm not the fastest in the world. I can type. You know, sometimes I trip over the letters. And look, I can give it a try. What would happen? Probably wouldn't get the job unless I couldn't afford anyone else. All right, you'll do. You'll do. When you come in, one hand with humility, but yes, I can do that. I've studied that. I know how to do that. And, this is what I'm good at. This is what I like to do. You come in with confidence and you believe in yourself, has a totally different impression. When you say words that you believe in, it has an impact on your children, on your students, on the people. When you believe in it. The most effective sermons or shiurim that I ever gave is not necessarily ones that I prepared the most for. It's the ones that I actually felt and it's something burnt within my heart. They're the ones that came out the best because they just came out with sincerity and with feeling and with passion. So too, when we pray, it has to be with this feeling, with this passion, and with this security, sense of confidence and security that the Almighty listens and hears to me. Then I pray with all of my heart. But if you're insecure and unsure, then when you pray, say, look, you know what? What the heck? I've got nothing to lose. So I'll say a prayer. Can't harm. Probably it'll do a bit of good. That's not a good prayer. You should never pray like that. I tell this to myself all the time. I should pray with confidence, with intense feeling. The confidence in the Almighty, that He listens and cares. Then my prayer comes out totally different. Then I feel confident in the prayer. So this world is a world of doubt where we walk around and we're unsure whether our prayers are heard. We're unsure what's going on. Am I doing the right thing? Does God love me? Why is this happening? Is this a punishment? How do I consolidate the concept of reward and punishment and God's overriding love despite who I am and what I've done? Yes, there's a concept of consequences, but despite the consequences, God's love never leaves me for one moment. And it's important for me to be continually aware of that, and that's the harmony that should exist in our lives, but does not always exist, because we're human beings. And fire exists in one point, so to speak, and water in another point, so to speak. Even though it says in the Zohar that Hedva tekiya belibai misitrada, that in the heart there is room for both joy and trepidation or awe of God simultaneously. As David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Gilu bir'ada, rejoice with trepidation. It's a contradiction. When you're in awe, you don't rejoice. When you rejoice, you're not in awe. It's an expression of love, rejoicing, or it's an expression of fear or holding back or respect. These are two different types of feelings. Yet the Zohar says that in our hearts there's room for both respect, awe, and love at the same time. Love draws you near. Awe, respect goes back a step, correct? When you're in awe with someone, do you go up to them, want to embrace them? No, you stand back at a distance because you're in awe. You're in awe and respect and you stand back. When you have a feeling of love, you go to embrace and come closer. The Zohar says there's room for both, but we're human beings and it's difficult to have them coexist. But they can and they should. And this is the lesson that we learn here. He who makes peace up there, let him make peace over here. Almighty God, give us a piece of heaven. Give us a piece of clarity. Give us some direction. And God says, I do. And that's why God revealed himself to Yaakov at that juncture in his life, of which that juncture in his life represents the descent of the soul, represents going into exile, represents moving from your comfort zone. It was the most difficult and darkest moment of Yaakov's life at that moment. Why? He's just about to go to Haran. He's got not a friend in the world. Not a friend in the world. He's leaving his family. Everything that he's familiar behind. He's going to uncharted territory, very difficult territory here. And guess what? He was totally robbed and doesn't have a cent to his name. Nothing. And you can well imagine that Yaakov Avinu is thinking to himself, the blessing that Yitzhak gave me 14 years ago, Vayiten lecha Elokim mital hashamayim u'mishmanei haaretz, v'rov dagan v'tirosh, may the Almighty give you from the dew of heaven and the fat of the land. You should have abundance of everything, spiritual, physical, everything. The blessing of Abraham I give you. Where's the blessing, God? The son of Esav caught up with him, wanted to kill him. But the truth is it was his uncle, so he didn't really want to kill him. But he wanted to fulfill his father's wish. And his father ordered him to go and find Yaakov, hunt him down, kill him. He ordered a hit on Yaakov. Eliphaz was the hitman. Sure, they made a movie about it. Sure. Yaakov pleads with him and he says, I know you. You grew up in our home. I babysitted you. I prepared you lunches. Who bought you all those treats for Shabbat? It was me. And he says, you're right, uncle, but what am I going to do? And he says, you know, there is a concept that if a person is totally poor and has nothing, he's considered like dead. Consider me like dead, take all my wealth, take everything. He's a poor man's got nothing, not a cent to his name, was almost killed, was the most difficult point in his life. Some doubt. Where's the blessing? Now Yaakov's doubt is not my doubt. Yaakov's doubt is maybe I erred, maybe I sinned. Maybe I'm unworthy and undeserving. But still a low point in one's life. And God reveals himself then and there. And when we ask God, give me a sign, give me a bit of heaven, or say shalom, the bit of heaven, give me some of the heaven, give me some of that clarity, that unity, that harmony. Give it to me, oh God. That's what we ask when we say, Oseh shalom b'maromav, we ask shalom aleinu. What, is there a war up there that God makes peace? Hang on a minute, stop the fighting, God says. Make peace, make peace. No, it means clarity. It means harmony and unity with God, where even opposites can coexist, so to speak. Because it's all one, it all comes from God and there's no confusion. That clarity, God, give us some clarity, give us some heaven. And God says, I do. I have. And that's why God revealed himself to Yaakov at that point in time, the lowest point in his life, to show that is when the soul comes down to this world and we think, what am I doing here? Or when we go into difficult situations and scenarios where we feel that we have entered the lion den of materialism and it's hard to cope and there's a lot of confusion and doubt. God's there. I'm there. I'm there for you. You may not feel it, you may not see it, but He's done it for Yaakov, and we are his grandchildren. We are called Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, which Yaakov's name is Israel. He's done it then because he wants to tell us for all times, I'm there with you. But on a deeper level, that's what it means when Yaakov saw the letter Alef. What's the letter Alef? The Alef that is missing in Esh, Mayim, God put it down below in Eretz. Now you understand that the Aleph, what is Aleph? The Aleph is a symbol, a part of heaven, a part of clarity. And I'll explain the letter Aleph in a second. On a deeper level, God gave it to us down here below, showing that there is heaven here. One can find clarity, one can find God amongst the confusion and the darkness and the desolation. And that's why Eretz is called not Ratz, it's called an Aleph. Eretz. And Shamayim is not called Eshmayim, it's called Shamayim because that Aleph God gave down below. And that Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet by which the whole world was created. And that Aleph is the first letter of the Torah, which is a covenant between us and God, and that strength that enables us to overcome the difficulties and the materialism of the world and the challenges. Having said all of that, now let us analyze the letter Aleph itself. What is so special about the letter Aleph? Have you ever seen the shape of the letter Aleph? What does the Aleph look like? The letter Aleph is a Vav, composite of two letters. Vav, Yud, and another Yud. The numerical value of Yud is, so there are three letters here that make it the Aleph. Yud and another Yud and a Vav. What's the numerical value of Yud? 10. Another Yud is 20. Vav is 6. The numerical value of 26. What is the numerical value of 26? God's name. Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. So Yud of God's name, right? Over here, just look up here. Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey of God's name. Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. Yud is 10. There are two Heys, right? That's 20. And there's a Vav, 26. God's name, which the Kabbalists teach us that the name Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey is the secret existence of the whole world, the creative force and energy of the whole world. That God gave down below. He didn't leave it in the heavens. He gave it down below. It's here. And He gave it to us. You know what the difference between the word exile and redemption is? Let's see. The word in Hebrew for exile is gola. Gola. Gimel, Vav, Lamed, Hey. Gola. Gimel, Vav, Lamed, Hey. Do you know what the Hebrew word for redemption is? Geula. What's the difference between the two? They sound very similar and they're spelled very similar. There's only one difference. The letter Alef. Geula is spelled Gimel, Alef, Vav, Lamed, Hey. So the same four letters. Gimel, Vav, Lamed, Hey. But there's an Alef there. Geula, what's the difference between redemption and exile and redemption? The letter Alef. Us living consciously and understanding and recognizing and revealing the letter Aleph, which is a symbol of that little bit of heaven down below. That name of God, which really represents that the real desire of the whole infrastructure of creation and the order of descent was for this world. And that's the reason why the Midrash says that this world, Eretz, is the land that fulfills the will of God. Because this, here in this world, down below, we fulfill the will of God, the purpose of existence. We fulfill the mitzvot in this world, which cannot be done in heaven. The soul, when it is in the Garden of Eden or prior to its entry into this world, which also exists in the Garden of Eden, doesn't experience that, doesn't have that. And that, all of that is concept of revelation of godliness. When you fulfill a mitzvah, when you study the Torah, that's God Himself. And that's why the Aleph, which is God Himself, is missing from the heavens. Yes, there's revelations, but the essence of God is missing from the heavens. It's down here below. But in order to get it, there has to be concealment. There has to be darkness. You can't get it without that because God has to conceal Himself. Just like if you want to understand a little bit of who I am or what I'm feeling, what I'm going through, I have to conceal it. And when I conceal it and reveal it to you, you get a bit of a feeling of who I am and what I am. But you can only get it when I conceal it. Which means where there is concealment, that's where you find God. Where there's exile, that's where you find God. Where there is the difficulties that you go through, the concealment that you go through, the descent of the soul down here in this world, that's where you find God. And that's the Aleph. And when we live by that, then we introduce Aleph to the whole world, to our limited existence, to our exiled mentality, and we live and introduce a new mentality, a mentality of Aleph. Aleph, by the way, stands for Alufo Shel Olam, Master of the world. And when we live by that, we live by a mentality of redemption, even though we may not have merited redemption at this moment. But we live by that mentality. And the more we all live by that mentality and introduce that mentality and the realism that godliness is with us, then indeed the redemption will be at hand. The redemption will come. And this is what the Megaleh Amukot teaches us in one word. He says it's all hinted in that one word, Vayetzeh, going out. When we go out, when the soul goes out, when we go out into the difficulties of the world, the challenges of the world, there is God. Vayetzeh stands for Vayar Yaakov, and Yaakov saw Surat Aleph, the letter Aleph. For what that Aleph represents is drawing down heaven down below. Bringing heaven down below. And that's why God revealed Himself specifically at that juncture and at that point. The most difficult point, the most darkest moment. Don't think for 1 second through difficulties and darkest moments that God abandoned us. God is there. And sometimes you find God more when we go through difficulties. Sometimes we feel God's presence and God's guiding hands and comfort more in the difficulties. When we come through it, we saw and we felt God was holding me. When everything was going good, I never felt it because I took godliness for granted. I took all the good and the light for granted. But I went through the difficulties. I felt and I saw God is holding me. And I went with a confidence that no matter what, I'm going with God. This is the divine will. And I'm traversing with God. I'm traversing with the Alef. I'm living with the Alef. That Alef represents that little heaven. That Oseh Shalom Bimromav. He who makes peace above. Yaseh Shalom Aleinu always makes peace down below. We just have to open our eyes and live it and feel it. That harmony does exist. That purity does exist down below, maybe even greater than up above. Certainly in the realm of potential. Certainly in the realm of potential. And that's what will happen when Mashiach comes. That potential will be revealed even greater than the heavens. We'll stop here. Any questions?